Ypres, a market town in Flanders. A beleaguered fortress guarding the last free corner of Belgian soil. Ypres to the British Army, or Ypres. Wipers to the newspapers and the upper classes. The British first came to Ypres in October 1914.
We pass over the moat through Vauban's 17th century ramparts by the Lille Gate. The large cobbled square is full of British and Belgian troops. We pay a too brief visit to the wonderful Flemish Cloth Hall and St. Martin's Church. It's a gem of a town, with its lovely old world gabled houses, red tiled roofs, and no factories visible to spoil the charm.
The first Battle of Ypres in 1914 began to demolish the charm. In 1915, still heavier bombardments beat upon the ancient town. This was the second battle. Ypres crumbled steadily, but held out. Through it lay all communication to the salient. The salient was a vast British slaughterhouse. Everywhere the Germans looked down on the British positions from the so-called ridges. It was in the salient in April 1915 that the Germans first used the new weapon of gas.
I don't mind admitting that I didn't think much of the urinating on the handkerchief. I didn't think it was sufficient protection. So I went into one of the trench latrines, you know, just a bucket stuck in a hole, and I stuck my head in the bucket. I made sure of it.
And in the salient at Hooge, 2 months later, the British first encountered the horror of flamethrowers.
The first idea sort of flitted through my mind was that the end of the world had come, and this was the day of judgment. Because suddenly the whole dawn had turned ghastly crimson.
All through 1916, the outline of the salient barely altered. 100 yards here, a quarter of a mile there, fruits of what was called the crater fighting. Scraps of ground were captured, lost, recaptured, at a cost never measured against real gain. In the salient, the guns were never silent. Labor was unending. Death and pain were always present. By 1917, the whole area had become an immense, disgusting sty, a ravaged vista of splintered trees, wrecked farms, and craters which quickly filled with water. In this low country, drainage was all important, but years of shelling had burst the drains and broken the banks of the streams which flowed through the salient. Rough plank roads and treacherous duckboard tracks zigzagged through the mires. All supplies had to be carried along them, mostly by night. All of them, day and night, were death traps. To the British Army, Ypres had become what Verdun became to the French, a symbol of absolute determination, of fatal endurance. By the summer of 1917, General Robert Nivelle's offensive on the Aisne had collapsed, and the French army had collapsed with it. Russia, swept by revolution in March, was now an unknown quantity. As Britain's Prime Minister, Mr. Lloyd George, said,
"The British Army was the one Allied army in the field which could be absolutely relied on for any enterprise."
Upon this army now fell the burden of the war. Not until June was the first stroke ready, under General Plumer, veteran commander of the British Second Army. And now, one of the war's most deadly methods reached its climax, the underground war. The war of mines and tunnels, groping beneath no man's land towards the enemy lines, in which men dug and crouched and fought and blew each other to pieces.
The essence of mining in the clay area was silence and secrecy. We wore felt slippers, rubber-wheeled trolleys, wooden rails, and we spoke in whispers. And when the German blew us, we never answered back. We suffered casualties and said nothing. Try not to give away where we were.
Under the Messines Ridge, which shut in the southern side of the Ypres salient, the British had driven 19 deep mine tunnels containing nearly 1 million pounds of high explosive. Some of these mines had been begun as far back as 1915. By 1916, some 20,000 British, Australian, Canadian, and New Zealand soldiers, and about as many Germans, were tunneling towards each other. The date was June the 7th. The time was 3:10 a.m. Nightingales were singing in the woods.
Then suddenly the whole earth heaved, and up from the ground came what really looked more like two enormous cypress trees, the silhouettes of great dark cone-shaped lifts of earth up to 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 feet. And we watched this, and then a moment later, of course, we struck the repercussion wave of the blast, and it flung us right away backwards.
The whole hillside, everything rocked like a ship at sea. The noise from the artillery was deafening. The thunder from our charges was enormous. The infantry dashed forward,